This is Steve Zeltzer with Workweek, and this upcoming election may be and probably will be the most important election in the history of the United States, since you have a challenge to U.S. government constitution, and basically that Trump is actually saying that he's not going to accept the results unless he's elected president, and has a history of insurrection and an effort to stop the transfer of power in 2016. And we need to look at the history of the Constitution because today, with the election only days away, the question of the Electoral College and the Constitution are important in relationship to this upcoming struggle. And joining us is Robert Ovetz. He's a faculty member, a lecturer at San Jose State University. He's a member of the CFA, an activist in that, and has been studying the nature of history of as far as the Constitution and the working class history of the working class struggle in the United States. So welcome to our show, Robert.
Glad to be here. Thanks, Steve.
So Robert, first of all, there's a lot of focus now on the Electoral College determining the result of the victor, and that even though the popular vote does not determine who's elected president, why is this Electoral College there is a lot of focus now on the Electoral College determining the result of the victor, and that even though the popular vote does not determine who's elected president, why is this Electoral College play such an important role in the United States, and what does it mean as far as this possible struggle this coming election?
Yeah, that's an important point that never gets discussed during election time. And I actually want to start by taking a step before the Electoral College and why it matters now. And the reason it matters now is because we didn't use the 14th Amendment, Section 3, which would have required that the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, bring charges of insurrection and sedition against President Trump for what he tried to do, which was carry out a self-coup on January 6, 2021. Section 3 would prevent anybody who shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion from ever holding office again. It doesn't even say that they have to be charged, convicted, sentenced, imprisoned. It just says if they have carried it out. And we wouldn't have this catastrophe of the Electoral College again, possibly throwing the results to somebody who didn't win the popular vote or didn't win a majority of the popular vote, which has happened numerous times in our country's history, from possibly winning. So the reason why we have the Electoral College is, frankly, to protect slavery. That's the reason why the framers put it in there. The Electoral College has the number of electors as each state has senators, 2, plus DC, because of a constitutional amendment, which gives them 3, and then each state's number of representatives, and each state has at least 1. So when you add all that up, that comes up to 538 electoral votes. The problem with the Electoral College, though, is that originally it was designed to inflate the representation of states that had a lot of slaves and few white citizens. And that was to protect slavery, first to recruit those states to ratify the Constitution and join this new federal system. And second was to make sure that they always could elect somebody who was pro-slavery. And what a lot of people don't realize is that the supermajority of our presidents before the Civil War, before Lincoln was elected, were from slave states, mostly Virginia, or big slave owners or pro-slavery. There was only one abolitionist president, John Quincy Adams, who didn't get directly elected. He was actually, because there was an unknown outcome, he was actually voted in by the House of Representatives, which is allowed under the 12th Amendment. So the Electoral College is really just a catastrophe, and it's always been like that. We've had the Supreme Court pick President Bush 2, stop the recount in Florida. We've had several presidents elected who didn't even win a majority of the vote. For example, Wilson the first time, Lincoln the first time. We've had multiple presidents who didn't win a majority of the vote and won the Electoral College, such as Trump, such as several other presidents in recent years. So we have this problem that it's almost impossible to amend the Constitution. We only have 27 amendments out of about 10,000 that have ever been filed. And so the only way to get rid of the Electoral College is we have to amend the Constitution. But the framers created this huge barrier, huge roadblock to changing the Constitution. And in fact, a lot of people don't realize that even in Article 5, which allows the amendment process, it says that no state shall be denied its representation in the Senate. So it effectively bans us also from getting rid of the Senate. So one of the things that really we need to pay attention to is there's many scholars out there who talk about the problems with the Electoral College, and they miss all these other details. They always talk about the handful of elections that decided the vote for somebody who didn't win a majority of the vote. But there are these other factors as well. And we should not forget that this system was designed on the basis of institutional racism, racial domination and supremacy. And the Electoral College is the legacy of slavery. And it continues to give the advantage to the economic elite to decide who they want their president to be.
And I recall that, Gore, when they stopped the counting of the ballots, and prevented really probably his victory, he refused to even have a investigation in the Congress. And that was a time when the Democrats controlled both the Congress and the Senate. They couldn't get one senator to say there should be an investigation. That Black Caucus in the Congress were calling for an investigation, and he refused. And they would not allow even an investigation of how they stopped the vote in the election. Now, the role of the Democrats in protecting this Electoral College, and also Garland refusing to move against Trump, waiting months and months and months, what's that about?
Well, he hasn't completely waited. Remember, there are charges. Jack Smith, the special prosecutor, has brought charges, but they are various kinds of lower level felony charges. The only one, and I tell my students this, I have several hundred intro to political science students every semester, and I tell them, the only thing, because they asked this question, like, how can Trump even run for office? He was just convicted in New York. Well, state felonies don't count. He's been charged with felonies. And I tell my students, it doesn't matter if he's convicted of every one of these federal charges, and there are dozens and dozens of them. He can still run for office. He can still win. He can still serve. He can sit in a federal prison cell as president. He can't pardon himself. That is probably constitutionally suspect. It's not explicitly prohibited, except in cases of impeachment. A president can't pardon themselves. So, he'll probably try to do that. He'll probably get away with it. But the reality is that the Democrats have always rolled over on these kinds of issues. And you give a good example of Gore. And we see it again, several years ago when the House of Representatives had that many months long investigation into January 6th, which I followed. I watched good chunks of every session. And I was called for local, regional TV media. I was on dozens of times on all the major networks talking about this. And one thing I kept saying was, I think we have the evidence here for charges of insurrection. And they never brought it. And so it's, sometimes it appears as if in our duopoly, our two-party system, that the Democrats are more afraid about what can get used against them than the Republicans are. And so they're worried, back in 2001, Gore gave up quickly because he was afraid people were going to go into the streets. And we would have a January 6th type of rebellion. And he conceded. Now, I just want to add one other possibility here is that if we have a disputed election pretty soon, it could very well go to the Supreme Court again. And that's going to be a disaster because there's obviously a 6-justice majority in favor of Trump. But there's an easy fix for this. Not easy, because you got to pass it through the Congress. But that is that the Congress, a lot of people don't realize this, in Article 3, the Congress can establish jurisdiction for all federal courts, and that includes the Supreme Court. So if we don't get rid of the Electoral College, the Democrats could say, we're going to pass a bill. And let's say they win the House and the Senate, and Biden's still in office for a few days. And they pass a bill that says Supreme Court can't hear cases of judicial review, which is actually not in the it's not in the Constitution. It's not a power of the Supreme Court. They could also say the Supreme Court does not get to hear cases dealing with election outcomes until all the ballots have been counted. So they could do stuff like that. They can constrict the authority of the Supreme Court. And I talk about this in my book. These are some possible solutions. And we never see either major party ever try any of this. And the Republicans are at a disadvantage in the Electoral College as well. And that's why they have to use gerrymandering and voter suppression and stuff like that. So it's possible to take the toys away from the Supreme Court, but they don't do it. They don't use it.
And of course, you were referring to the fact that Gore was worried there would be rebellion in this country if this stalemate took place and they held up the votes. You now have a Supreme Court which has ruled that the president can do actions and call them official, which violate all laws. He can assassinate people, and that's legal under the Supreme Court. You have a situation in which the Congress now is controlled by a Republican, Johnson, who is
House.
the House rather, is controlled by the House and who's willing to go along with whatever Trump says. So we face a situation in which also Trump has said they're not going to accept anything other than victory. And they may try a coup. Now, the difference between now and the previous election is the Democrats are in charge. So they have state power. But there has been no mobilization either by them and certainly by the unions to prepare for a possibility of a civil war and a insurrectional movement, both from the right and the left. So within the framework of the Constitution, it seems like it's set up for this kind of confrontation that can't be resolved within the official structure of capitalism.
Yeah, and when it will be resolved, it'll be resolved in favor of whatever the organized property interests are able to engineer through the system. And here's the thing also about our system is that what we call the checks and balances make our system so incredibly complex that it's possible for those who are in the minority to block all change by winning anywhere in the system. For example, if you introduce a bill, you just have to win at the subcommittee to kill the bill. Even if the other house passes it unanimously, you can still kill that bill. You can get the president to veto it, et cetera, et cetera. And so our system is set up for paralysis, and not to use that word in an offensive way to anybody who has a physical disability, but our system is paralyzed. And it's paralyzed because after over 2 centuries, we have not renewed and fixed the basic stuff to allow things to happen. And so essentially Trump's strategy is, I'm going to ignore the system. I don't care about the system. This is a typical definition of what Hannah Arendt described in her classic book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. This is what totalitarians do, is they use the system to get elected, and then they dismiss the system. And he's very open about it. Like you said at the outset, he said he'll be a dictator on day one. The other day, you didn't mention this, he also said he's going to use the military to hunt down people like you and me and anybody who's a dissenter.
And Palestinian activists, leftists. I mean, he calls capitalists like Obama and like Harris communists. They're Marxist and communists. I think that was what Hitler did as well. He called the liberals communist in Germany, who were liberals, who weren't communists. And there were communists there who actually were in a united front with the fascists against the bourgeois government.
Well, they were technically conservatives at the time, and those conservatives gave him the majority because he didn't have an outright majority. So together they formed a coalitional majority. He gets into power. He has the referendum, the plebiscite to get emergency powers. He wins that overwhelmingly, and then he destroys his allies. And he also called in the union leaders to a meeting, and when they left, one by one, they started being arrested and assassinated.
And the situation here is Trump has said to Sean Fain, you should be fired. And Sean Fain actually called him out more than any other union leader. You're a scab and you're busting unions and you would prevent a strike. So it seems like Sean Fain is target number one in labor. And probably since the UAW is already under monitorship, they could put the UAW in trusteeship and put Sean Fain in jail using
They
the
could
attorney
seize all
general.
their assets. Yeah, they could seize their huge strike fund, all their facilities, their capital investments, everything. Yeah, we face a catastrophic situation. And I think, why are we at this situation? How did we get to the point where somebody who's so openly embracing fascist strategies and ideas, even though he won't admit that he's a fascist? Although, I remember, when he was running and won, somebody asked him what he thought of Mussolini, and he was like, Mussolini's Mussolini, right? So he obviously knew who Mussolini was. We give him that. His history teacher taught him something. But the reality is that our system has gotten to the point where change is impossible to make using the rules of the system. So all you need is somebody to come along and speak to that and say, this system is broken. I can fix it. Another classic indicator of a strong man mentality. I alone can fix it. I will act on your behalf. And we have a multitude of terrible crises going on. It's almost November and it's like 80 degrees, right? We have these hurricanes that are wiping out entire cities. We have rising ocean levels. We're going to hit 3 degrees temperature increase by the end of the century. We are in deep crisis. And this is a good example of what Naomi Klein called the shock doctrine. We are clearly in crisis, multiple crises. It's impossible to take any action on them because the oil companies and the super elite can all block that change. And so you come along and you get somebody who can get into power using the rules of the system and then dismantle that. And we are in that situation because both major parties have essentially blocked any systematic, basic, modest systemic change or even modest reforms. There's virtually no action on any of the big issues. And it's been like that my entire lifetime. And so we are seeing the two parties that have facilitated somebody like him to get to the point where he's very clear if he gets elected, he's not going to leave office. Of course, it looks like his own family won't join him in the White House, but but he's not going to leave office.
And the question of property, as you've written about in your book, We the Elites, the Constitution was based on property owners, and also protection of slavery and slaves, which was considered property, and that's why it was written into the Constitution. And that electoral college is part of protecting their property. So, how do you see the role of the working class in relationship to this potential revolutionary struggle over who's going to control things? Because, as you say, the Democrats are refusing to really act against an open fascist who basically says, I'm not going to accept an election unless I'm in charge, and is now organizing to overthrow the government as we speak.
So the working class has been misled for decades, sadly, by our unions. And I have to say, unions are still, with all the flaws in the design of unions, is that that's the only real structural organizational power that working people have, that the working class has. So we have to be able to take over our unions and democratize them and make them fighting rank and file unions. And I want to give you a little snippet of why I still have a lot of expectations that this can be done and done quickly. I just came back from a weekend of I teach in several places, but my main union, California Faculty Association, we had our semester assembly. And it was impressive. Our new caucus, I don't know if you can see it here, but I'm wearing a pin for the caucus of rank and file education workers. We brought a debate to the floor over the direction of this union between giving money from members, which we were not asked to contribute, to fund Democratic candidates for office, or whether we should create a strike fund. Believe it or not, this 40-year-old union does not have a strike fund, and become a fighting union. rather than wait for our supposed democratic allies to deliver, which they never do. And it was a phenomenal fight, and we won that resolution calling for a strike fund to be created. We've also democratized our bargaining committee so that all members are elected to the bargaining committee. Before, it's been in the shadows. You know, the president of our union just picks whoever they want. The same guy has been the chair of our bargaining committee for longer than I've been there. I've been in the CSUs for 12 years now at two campuses. So the thing I just want to get to is when we debated the strike fund resolution, we had phenomenal support from the 100 and something delegates. Many of them we didn't even know. And people recognize that if you don't have a strike fund, your strikes are no threat at all. They're not credible because you won't be able to get a lot of people to join your strike to participate because they can't afford to lose income with nothing coming in. And 60% of our faculty are like me. We're not tenured, contingent, and teaching in multiple places. So that's the kind of fight that has to happen. We're seeing it happen in the Teamsters. We've seen it happen in UAW. We're seeing it happen in Unite Here right now. A lot of people aren't hearing about that. We're also seeing union staff, and you've reported on this, that union staff themselves are unionizing, and they're starting to go on strike. And so this is an upwelling that we're seeing, an attempt of the rank and file to really redirect our unions, because there's vast assets and power and organizational structure there. And we're going to need that because, you know, I fear for what will happen if Trump wins next month.
Well, the Vermont AFL-CIO in 2016 actually passed a resolution saying that there should be a general strike of the entire labor movement if there was a coup or if there was an insurrection, attempted coup or insurrection. And the president of the AFL-CIO, Richard Trumka, ruled it out of order, said they could not even discuss it. And when they passed it, he threatened to put them in trusteeship. He later said that the reason that they did not want them to discuss a general strike is Trump may have used that as a pretext to declare martial law in the United States.
Yeah, they
So,
were way ahead of their time, weren't they?
so at this point, though, in the labor movement, the unions, it seems like, and it is, the AFL-CIO has put all their eggs in the basket of Harris. The SEIU is spending $200 million without a vote of their members for Harris and the Democrats. And none of the national unions are saying we may face an insurrection and open attack, open fascist attacks. I mean, if you think about what a Trump government would mean, probably he would empower these racist and fascists to start killing union organizers in the South, start murdering union organizers. So it's a existential crisis for workers and for labor as far as organizing. The NLRB will probably be shut down, or it'll put in union busters in it, and there won't be any more NLRB elections in the United States. Yet the unions, there's no warning that our existence and labor existence as it has gone on in the post-war period is going to be over. That is not being presented by this trade union bureaucracy. So how are people going to get ready, and what should they do to prepare for this kind of political, actually concrete confrontation in the class struggle?
Well, that fight against the Vermont AFL-CIO is not over. Steve Early just came out with a book about that. And I believe Liz Schuler has, she tried earlier this year to overturn the election of the same caucus's leadership, new leadership, tried to dismiss the outcome of the members' votes. But I think they prevailed recently. So the AFL-CIO is still trying to, for some reason, still trying to suppress efforts for workers to organize against the rising threat of fascism. It's mind-boggling.
But isn't the AFL-CIO leadership part of a pro-imperialist, pro-capitalist agenda? I mean, the AFL-CIO was formed as a pro-capitalist, pro-imperialist union formation against communists and leftists in the unions in 1955. There was a witch hunt purging communists and leftists out of the trade union movement. And this coming together of the AFL-CIO was actually an appendage of the U.S. government policy internationally. In fact, they took the money then from the CIA for the AIFLD to overthrow governments around the world, and they're still doing that. In Ukraine, they tried to overthrow the government. They were they did overthrow the government. I mean, Randy Weingarten was there encouraging people to overthrow the government, and they continue to do that in Venezuela, in Argentina. I mean, they support the overthrow of governments that challenge U.S. economic and imperial interests.
Yeah, my next book, which will be out with Haymarket in 2026, it's, Rebels for the System. It's about NGOs and the labor movement and foundations. I write about how the AFL-CIO partnered with the Ford Foundation and other foundations globally to sabotage also militant unions in the global South. And it turns out that the Solidarity Centers, which are, still an arm of the AFL-CIO, that it was actually originally it was those branches of the AFL-CIO that was doing what you're talking about, and they renamed them, but they were actually launched with foundation funding as well. So there's a lot of overlap there between foundations and AFL-CIO and carrying out that U.S. imperial power policy. But you were asking me about, what we can do. I don't have a magic crystal ball. I don't know what we need to be doing specifically, but I can say this, that we need to take every effort we can to democratize our unions, because the leadership of many unions does not align with the interests or the desires or the objectives of many of the members. Our unions for too long have been pursuing that post-World War II policy where we're going to trade control over work for a tiny little pay increase or saving our benefits. And it's really driven the movement into the ground. The CFA, for example, has an electoral college system. We don't vote directly for our leadership. We're not subject to federal law, such as the Labor Management Act. So they don't have to turn over internal documents. I've been fighting for months to try to get a copy of a document of our affiliation with SEIU. And I'm not allowed to get a copy of it. I can actually read it, but I can take notes, but I can't actually have a copy. We just got the results of our resolutions that I was talking about earlier, and they don't tell us how many people voted or what the total results were. They just say whether it passed or not. So I think the starting point to answer your question is we need to get people together and we need to have these conversations of what do we need to be doing differently, not just about getting better benefits or better contracts. And, I really admired the work that Jane McAlevey did for decades, but I think there's a kind of dead end to that work, and that is get a better contract. Okay, for what? We need to turn our unions into organizations that will allow the working class to organize and fight for transforming our world and our society. We're long past the time. Our planet is on fire. You look around, there's huge amounts of destruction that's happening, and we need to move ourselves beyond capitalism if we're going to save the surface of this planet and the life forms that live on it. And we're not going to be able to do it with the existing political structures that we have in place.
Well, your book is about the structure, the U.S. capitalist structure. What kind of structure would you like to see and is necessary for working people to defend themselves and society and the planet?
Well, it's interesting you asked that, because I'm trying to I'm pitching a book right now, actually, that answers that question, and I'm calling it America 2.0. How do we get past the system of capitalist democracy that we currently have? And so I'm going to go a little bit utopian in this book, and I'm going to take us through the many different existing movements and what is missing to get us past capitalism. And, I draw on some literally different traditions, everything from anarchist ideas of confederation of local communities, to syndicalism, taking over the economic system and running it democratically, and reducing the amount of work that we do, reducing production so that we can meet the needs of this population, and having a direct democratic system that's based in the communities and based in where we do the essential work. So it's just a little teaser for what my second next book is going to be.
Well, are you optimistic? Because it seems that although we're facing these cataclysmic crises and that the working class faces massive attacks and the mobilization of the state against workers, if particularly if Trump is elected, not that Harris is any different fundamentally. Um, what's your view about what's going to happen? Because although we face these objective conditions, the consciousness of people are not really connected to the dire situation. You look at what's happening in Florida now with the hurricanes, people still don't make a connection that they're a direct result of wars, of of gas drilling. That doesn't seem to be in the consciousness of people, that this is a directly result of what's happening in the environment.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to point out that I think Harris is different from Trump to some degree. And an important degree is that she still believes in the rules of the system. And she's a corporate Democrat. I think we'll have more of the same if she gets elected. But ultimately, she won't be transforming the system in any fundamental way. She won't be meeting any of the basic needs. And, I have classrooms of students who are working 2 to 3 jobs. They have ill parents. They don't even have health insurance or access to a doctor. They have broken cars. Many of them are homeless. Many of them are facing high levels of anxiety and mental health struggles. And I don't see anything on the horizon from the Harris administration to address any of these fundamental issues, and certainly not climate catastrophe. Fundamentally, she's different from Trump in that she doesn't want to rule as a dictator. But I think that her policies will serve the same economic elite. But in terms of am I a pessimist? I call myself an optimistic pessimist. Every day I'm pessimistic, but then I look around at how people are organizing and fighting and struggling, and it gives me optimism. And I have to be a part of it too. Also, I can't just sit on the sidelines. And, right now, I have to say, the Secretary General of the UN is really calling out the alarm every day. And that alarm is not just for the fact that we're falling into the abyss of climate catastrophe, but he's also calling on our global community to act. And you have to find a place that works for you. You have to find a way to contribute and to act that works, that you understand. But it's a call to arms right now. People, not literally arms weapons, but it's a call to arms to get people to act because our system is broken. And we have a lot of unmet needs. And unfortunately, a lot of people are looking to the fascist solution to meet those needs. And that's a real danger.
And the genocide going on, financed by the United States, the bombing of Lebanon, which the United States bombed actually as well with battleships. It seems there's an escalation of terrorism, of genocide going on, which the United States is using now in Palestine, but could be used all over the world. Do you see any danger of a world war that we're going towards?
It's not a perspective danger. It's happening now. The entire region is being set on fire by Israel. And the United States is actually militarily engaged in bombing several countries. And again, this is another thing I write about Article 2 in my chapter of Article 2 of the executive branch, is that the president has assumed all the military powers, what I call the power of the sword. And, I tell my students, you can remember these powers of Congress: the power of the sword, power of the purse, power of the pen, and the power of oversight. The president has usurped the power of the sword and is unilaterally bombing Syria, Yemen, in addition to doing what you're talking about. And so the entire region is engulfed in war. It's something that just horrifies me every day. And it's an illustration of a larger problem that we haven't talked about yet. And it's not just that our constitutional system can't act, but our global rules-based system, and this is what I teach about in my international relations class, The global rules-based system is not working. It's based on the liberal ideals that states can cooperate to solve problems, and states that do not cooperate are subject to having their sovereignty violated. I think we have a very good example, and I don't say this lightly because half my family lives in Israel. My father survived the Holocaust in Romania, but I don't say this lightly, but Israel is violating every rule and law, and no state is acting. Nobody is acting, and we're seeing a breakdown of the rules-based system. And it's also in some ways a repudiation of global liberalism, that model has failed. And I think it was just this week that the BRICS countries met with ever more new members. So there's an entire new global structure being built. And these are not, for the most part, many of these countries are repressive, authoritarian monarchies, and they are directly challenging the global rules-based system. And this will only encourage more states to do what's going on with Russia, in the Ukraine and Israel, and now Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, soon to be Iran and Gaza and the West Bank. And so we're seeing our planet literally catching on fire, and there is no response to this.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much for joining us. We've been talking with Robert Ovetz. He's the author of We the Elites and Why the U.S. Constitution Serves the Few in light of the upcoming election and the upheaval that we're going to be facing in the United States as a result of the internecine warfare going on in our economic and political system. So thanks for joining us on our show.
Good talking with you, Steve.